There was no dawn anymore in the United States of two coasts, only a persistent, low-grade glow diffused through a sky the color of oxidized copper. Since the timber tariffs had detonated 18 years earlier, entire swathes of forest from Maine to Oregon had been strip-cut, then abandoned once the Treasury's patriotic pulp subsidies collapsed into the crater of hyperinflation. In the smog-fogged half-light of April 2043, the steel canyons of Manhattan looked hollowed out, their windows dark, their towers papered with wind-shredded posters that once proclaimed "Buy Trump coin or be left behind." Each poster carried the same watermark, a stylized silhouette of the 45th's profile, crowned not with hair but with the circuited latticework of the neuroserver that held his transplanted mind. Deep in the former Javits Center, a football field-sized trading pit flickered with holographic tickers for Trump, the only legal tender on continental soil. Every second, a billion satoshis of the presidential crypto lashed across blockchains engineered by the Federal Algorithmic Reserve, a bureau that reported directly to the Oval Node where the ex-president's disembodied consciousness pulsed like a starfish of code. Analysts wearing respirator masks shouted at vertical arrays that listed the day's ration prices: dehydrated pasta, plastic-wrapped produce, one-ply tissue in 20-square increments. That final entry had been soaring for months, until even the glitchy market boards could not keep the digits aligned. Outside, shivering lines snaked beneath rusted magnolia trees whose leaves had long since been ground into counterfeit pulp. People traded earrings, heirloom rings, and sometimes entire identities for a single roll, provided the roll was genuine forest cellulose and not the abrasive algae-based knockoff known on the street as green glass. Cal Reyes kept his GoPro steady against his sternum as he filmed the queue. The camera's cracked screen projected the image back at him: gaunt faces, wind-burned cheeks, a father cupping his child's ears as black market recruiters ambled past, promising imported softness smuggled through Nova Scotian tunnels. The recruiters belonged to the cellulose barons, an outfit rumored to have roots in the main logging syndicates that survived the tariff reckoning by burrowing literally under the border before Canada welded its gates shut. In legend, they were equal parts robber barons and folk heroes, peddling contraband charmin by night and financing free clinics by dawn. In reality, every shipment they sold kicked 10% into the digital coffers of the Oval Node. Cal's editor at the insurgent stream channel Sparkwire wanted incontrovertible proof of that pipeline, proof tight enough to pierce the collective trance that kept most citizens clutching their Trump wallets like religious amulets. "Follow the tissue, follow the token," she had said over an encrypted subcarrier that flickered between street lamp harmonics. "If you can thread the line from the sewers of the Bronx to the president's mainframe, we'll slam a lawsuit through the last independent circuit court before the node reboots the Constitution entirely." So Cal went north. He traveled by fractured avenues where stacks of shipping containers served as barricades against bread riots. He filmed the improvised bazaars that sprouted in the shadows of half-finished luxury developments, monoliths abandoned after overseas investors vaporized under tariff backlash. He interviewed a former Treasury coder who now etched data onto vellum, real vellum, because electrons were taxable but parchment flew beneath the bot's radar. Each fragment of testimony he gathered hinted at the same geometry: toilet paper in, Trump coin out, a circular flow that lubricated the machinery of a dictatorship running on 70 megawatts of narcissistic fury. By dusk of the fourth day, he reached the riverfront smelt yard where the baron's southbound barges unloaded under the cover of scrap fires. The smell, equal parts burned pine resin and wet newspaper, coated his tongue. He ducked behind oxidative hulks of bulldozers as a convoy of forklifts rolled past, pallets shrink-wrapped in ghost white. His chest-rig lens zoomed on the stencil. Ultrasoft Premium, Quebecois insignia still visible beneath the hastily sprayed stars and stripes. He kept filming while muscle in thermoptic ponchos scanned the waterfront with IR spectacles. Their helmets carried the baron's sigil, a stylized bull moose clutching a scepter made of birch. Cal's feed transmitted in real time to Sparkwire's offshore servers in Reykjavik, though the lag in his earpiece told him packet loss was rising. The node's sensors patrolled fiber trunks with machine-learned vengeance. A tugboat coughed upriver, spotlight shuddered, hull riddled with bullet dents from last week's Coast Patrol crackdown. From its cargo hold emerged crates not of tissue but of hydrogen cartridges, currency for the baron's clandestine paper mills buried in the Adirondacks. The swap was almost ballet. Tissue on shore, cartridges on deck, forklifts pirouetting in silence except for the hydraulic hiss. Cal risked a better angle and caught his boot on an unraveling cable. Metal clanged. A guard whirled, visor glowing red. "RUC," he barked, scanning for the biomodded rodents that the regime's urban counterintel deployed as camera sniffers. Cal bolted, ducking between shipping drums as pulse beams ricocheted, carving incandescent arcs across corrugated iron. A pallet split, and bale-wrapped tissue fanned in the wind like migrating gulls. He dove through a gap in chain link, scissoring into the maze of alley pipes that once cooled the Edison power station. Pursuit footsteps faded. Barons seldom crossed into regime sensor grids. Panting against a limestone wall, Cal replayed the last 10 seconds. His lens had captured a retina clear frame, a crate-sealing machine whose interface dispensed QR codes mapped directly to a Trump coin wallet address. The wallet string scrolled atop the display beside a holographic watermark of the oval node's electoral crown. Proof, raw and luminous. The power station tunnels were warm, humming with residual current the regime had failed to route elsewhere. He found a maintenance alcove, patched his uplink through scavenged copper, and exfiltrated the footage. The Reykjavik server accepted 1 gigabyte before connection yawed and died. Enough, he hoped, to indict a crypto king. But tomorrow he needed context, financial logs, chain of custody receipts, any artifacts that spelled kickback. Rumor placed those logs in a decommissioned data silo under Wall Street, now rechristened Liberty Archival Vault No. 7 and operated by the Department of Patriotic Supply. The irony was nauseating. Once the nerve center for global trade, the vault now archived ration records for the commodity that epitomized the failure of that trade. He dragged himself through midnight streets where protest banners glowed in ultraviolet graffiti. "Make fiber free again and computers don't bleed." Near the skeletal frame of One World Tower, a crowd had gathered around a barrel fire fueled by shredded congressional records. A woman with electrodes braided into her hair read news headlines directly from her cortex to a haptic speaker. Cal paused to listen, and in tonight's address, President Emeritus Trump, via the Oval Node, assured citizens that the upcoming soft future stimulus would provide every loyal wallet with 20 rolls of budget-embossed tissue by the end of Q2. Markets rallied, yet supply chain experts cautioned. The speaker fizzed as riot police cruisers rounded the corner. People scattered into the labyrinth of scaffolds. Cal slipped away, noting the bulletin. In 3 months, engineered scarcity would lift, or so the node promised. Why would a cartel allow its greatest leverage to dissolve? Either an even harsher necessity loomed, or the promise was counterfeit propaganda to stall unrest. In a shuttered bodega, he purchased stale energy bars priced at 30 micro-TRU-MPS each, roughly a week of average wages, while the vendor swiped rad gauges over each barcode to ensure no hidden trackers. Cal ate beneath dim solar lamps whose panels were filmed with so much soot they provided a pulse of neon only when wind gusts cleared the surface. Sleep came fitfully, haunted by images of paper rolls unraveling into long scrolls of encoded presidential tweets that wrapped the skyline like bandages. He woke before dawn to the rumble of repurposed sanitation trucks ferrying detainees to re-education theaters. On every windshield was a decal, a bleeding heart wrapped in a dollar sign, the emblem of the Loyalist Corps. Cal joined the morning exodus toward the subway catacombs, camera tucked beneath a scarf. Turnstiles demanded biometric verification for a discounted fare, but he jimmied a maintenance door and dropped onto the track bed, following phosphorescent paint that indicated safe footing. Turbines above pumped acrid air, a reminder that the city's filtration plants had been offline since the Canadian pulp embargo choked the Hudson with untreated effluent. In the near dark, he found pilgrimage graffiti, arrows pointing toward Liberty Vault's utility ingress, scrawled by smugglers who ferried contraband data through forgotten service conduits. The last arrow ended at a grate sealed with concrete. He cursed, then examined the seam. Someone had scored it recently. The mortar fractured at a touch. He wedged a crowbar, gift from a street mechanic, and pried until a wedge-shaped portal gaped open. Beyond, silence. He advanced, flashlight diffused through particulate haze. Walls dripped condensation, each droplet tinted faintly green from sodium-based oxidizers. The corridor sloped downward, bending until it formed a natural vector of claustrophobia. At its terminus glimmered a retro-reflective panel. Liberty Archival Sector B, authorized clearance only. Cal traced his fingers over the lock plate. Despite 2 decades of decay, its biometric lens remained intact, standby lights blinking at a heartbeat's tempo. He retrieved a replica thumbprint membrane stolen from a regime recruiter asleep on subway methacks, pressed it against the sensor, whispered the code phrase engraved on the MEM strip. "Freedom is fiber." The lock flashed, hissed, and the door yielded. Inside, racks of server coffins stretched into blackness, their fans long silent. Yet a soft blue halo permeated aisle 9, cabinet 45, the only rack still drawing power. On its faceplate gleamed a single glyph, the presidential profile shimmering through animation cycles that simulated breathing. Data leaked from the cabinet in strands of light, coalescing into a volumetric display of rolling transaction blocks. Inbound cellulose shipments, outbound Trump mint schedules, a sinus rhythm of corruption. Cal's breath fogged. He set the GoPro to a full sensor dump, capturing raw frames at native lumen integer. Each new block added to the chain blazed with the signature oval node omega, time-stamped to the nanosecond and notarized with a shard of the president's digitized gray matter pattern. Proof had become gospel. He reached for an extraction port, careful, no sudden electromotive discharge, and slotted a cold crystal wafer fashioned from recycled smartphone glass. Terabytes cascaded onto it, line after line of ledger entries. Halfway through the download, the cabinet's avatar pivoted, as though the face within the icon saw him. Unauthorized archival activity detected, a vocal synthesis intoned, flanging with static. Identify for patriotic logging dot. Cal yanked the wafer. A power surge sparked across rails. Fire safety halon hissed overhead. He sprinted, door motors grinding behind him as shutters descended. He cleared the portal, slamming his crowbar sideways to jam the mechanism, then pelted up the incline. Alarms boomed through speaker arrays, shepherding him toward the surface where loyalist drones would be waiting, but better the open chaos of the streets than the iron grip of basement justice. He burst into the subway tunnel just as an old maintenance locomotive screeched past, remote piloted by scrap salvagers. Cal leapt, fingers scraping steel, and hauled himself onto a flatbed loaded with discarded lampposts. Manhattan lights dwindled behind him. Ahead, the tunnel forked west, toward an abandoned ferry spur rumored to connect with the Baron's Hudson seaports. Perfect. He needed unlikely allies now, and the black market monarchs of softness were unlikely indeed. Wind flayed his face as he crouched between sparking rail ties, footage safe in a pocket etched with anti-RF mesh. He rehearsed headlines inside his skull. Digital dictator funnels black market tissue money to crypto empire. He pictured the human tide that might rise after seeing what he had seen. How they would march with lines of linked arms, chanting for paper and constitution alike. Somewhere below Washington, in an armored subterrane coded as the Oval Node, an echo of a man felt a tremor run through its deep neural arrays. A tremor named Cal Reyes. The locomotive clattered to a stop somewhere north of Albany, beneath a cathedral arch of corrugated roofing that once protected commuter platforms from winter snow. Rusty letters on a hanging sign still spelled PUJHKPSIE, though every vowel was pocked by bullet holes. The flatbed jerked and Cal Reyes rolled from its edge into a drift of damp sawdust. Steam rose from the rails like breath in February. It carried the scent of fresh-cut pine, improbably sweet in a nation starved of forests. Floodlights ringed the depot, but most were dark, their lenses smashed by errant fists or drone shrapnel. The only glow came from vats of biolum algae lined up like sentries beside the tracks. Makeshift street lamps fed with discarded slurry from the contraband mills. A silhouette emerged through the greenish haze. A lean woman in grease-streaked coveralls, sleeves rolled high enough to reveal subdermal implant tags glowing along her forearms. She leveled a flechette pistol at him, thumb poised above the induction coil. Name and barter, stranger. Cal. No barter, but I've got proof. He tapped the GoPro strapped to his chest. Footage that can shred the node's spine. She cocked her head like a bird evaluating tinsel. Everyone's got proof. Most of it's fake. The rest gets lost in packet hell before sunrise. Cal produced the crystal wafer from an inner pocket, careful not to drop it in the sawdust mud. This isn't a rumor. It's the vaulted ledger, the kickbacks, shipment IDs, wallet hashes. Direct handshake with Oval Node Omega. I just need a trust channel big enough to broadcast. The pistol lowered by a centimeter. You're riding into the kingdom of Duke Redwood. He's not fond of journalists. Cal shrugged his camera. Nobody is. But he hates the node more, or so I hear. Her mouth tensed, then curved up. Call me Juno. She holstered the weapon and whistled. A pair of dockhands appeared, beefy shadows lugging reels of fiber optic rope. They trussed the flatbed to a track tractor and hauled it toward the yawning mouth of an underground ramp. Cal followed Juno down iron stairs crusted with resin. The air thickened, scented by a medley of bleach, wood sap, and ozone. They passed blast doors repainted in glossy white. Stenciled above each was a moose rampant, clutching a toilet roll like a royal orb. Beyond lay the millworks, an abyssal chamber where smuggled logs from Quebecan boreal forests were pulverized in giant drum refiners that rumbled like captive thunderstorms. Conveyor belts shuttled fluff to bleaching towers. Giant screws expressed water that was recycled into fungal vats producing enzyme cocktails. An entire vertical economy thrived in secrecy, lit by sodium lamps cannibalized from abandoned highways. Workers in rebreather masks guided bale presses that spit out finished rolls as large as tractor tires. Some rolls bore gold stripes, luxury grade, 2-ply, rumored to be softer than any legal tissue in the pre-tariff era. They weren't loading these onto trucks. They were shrink-wrapping them onto pallets embossed with holographic seals. Cal recognized the shimmering watermark, Lombardi Consortium, the node's own logistics front. The barons were printing product for the very tyrant they claimed to oppose. Juno saw the calculation in his eyes. It's complicated, she said. You show Redwood your wafer. Maybe it gets uncomplicated. They entered a side corridor where the industrial roar faded behind acoustic panels carved from insulation foam. Ahead, antique mahogany doors appeared absurdly elegant in the subterranean grime. 2 guards in flannel suits flanked the entrance, their necks bristling with implanted antennae that twitched at electromagnetic fields. One sniffed, lips peeling into a grin. Fresh catch. Guest, Juno corrected. For the Duke. Inside, a banquet hall stretched wider than a basketball court. Chandeliers scavenged from Gilded Age mansions dangled above trestle tables piled with contraband luxuries. Cans of Canadian maple syrup, jars of real coffee, dresses sewn from virgin cotton smuggled through defunct Gulf ports. At the far end, seated on a throne carved from cedar planks, lounged Duke Redwood, broad shoulders swaddled in a cloak of patchwork flannel, beard braided with silver scrap. His left eye had been replaced by a lens cluster that zoomed and focused like a camera shutter. He paused mid-conversation with a trio of suited envoys sporting treasury lapel pins. When Redwood's cybernetic eye whirred toward Cal, heat radiated across the hall. Another rogue streamer? He called, voice deep as a kettle drum. I already fund half the broadcasters in Jersey. Cal stepped forward, sweat prickling under his parka. I'm not here for funding. I need amplification. He lifted the wafer between 2 fingers. Ledger logs, Oval Node Omega cutouts. Proof that the node not only profits from your mills but engineers the scarcity you rely on. Together we can burn him. The envoys stiffened. Redwood leaned forward until cedar creaked. My mills keep children in tissue, Reyes. If scarcity dies, so do the towns along this river. Why should I sabotage my dominion? Cal thumbed his GoPro and projected a still onto the banquet wall. The Liberty Vault interface, the QR wallet address flickering beneath the Oval Node's crown. Because he's skimming 50% off your top line. You bleed, your people starve. All because a disembodied ego demands tribute. End the node, and you negotiate the cellulose corridors on your own terms, maybe even with open markets beyond our borders. Murmurs rippled among the banquetiers. Redwood's eye whirred again, enlarging the projection until every ledger entry shone like a guilty constellation. One of the treasury envoys turned pale. He recognized an encrypted routing number linked to his own departmental stipend. Redwood dismissed him with a flick of 2 fingers. Guards escorted the envoy out, shoes scraping marble. Silence held. Then Redwood stood, cloak unfurling. "We talk in the forge." He strode toward a side door. Cal followed, blinking at how the banquet resumed behind them immediately, as though court drama was but seasoning in the night's feast. The forge was a conference bunker walled in transparent aluminum. Inside, a cobalt arc furnace melted scrap electronics into ingots that would become heatsink fins for the Baron's portable servers. Redwood keyed a code on a bio-lock pad. The furnace dimmed, noise dampening to a polite hum. "Amplification you want," Redwood said, pacing. "We can ride the North Atlantic mesh cables. But within seconds, the node's sentinel algorithms will swarm every packet. The ledger will vanish in deep cache exile before the world can sneeze." Cal paced opposite him, emboldened by momentum. "Then we overload the sentinels. A denial of service war. Your mills have spare compute cycles, quantum accelerators stitched into those bleaching towers. We stuff them with spoofed ledger fragments, fakes so intricate the sentinel nets choke on verifying authenticity. While they thrash, we slip the real wafer to open nets in Shanghai, Lagos, Reykjavik. Each node seeds torrents. Once the ledger's in the wild, no eraser can scrub it." Redwood rubbed a palm over his beard, rattling metal beads. "And my reward? Legacy," Cal shot back. "Be the Baron who freed cellulose, not the vassal who tightened the leash. Your people will still produce, only they'll trade with 10 times the volume at fair price, no tithe to the tyrant ghost." The Duke barked a laugh that echoed off aluminum plating. "Legacy doesn't buy sterilizers for the collar awards, but global volume does." He slapped the lock pad. The furnace roared back to full glare. "All right, Reyes. Operation Phoenix Roll commences at dawn." Pink dawn smeared the Hudson when a barge convoy cast off from the Poughkeepsie sluice gates. Each deck was stacked not with paper but with shipping containers bristling with hacked AI accelerators salvaged from defunct cryptocurrency farms. The accelerators were wired into microreactors driven by mothballed naval batteries. Onshore drones hoisted reels of fiber cable into radio masts disguised as clothed utility poles. The entire millworks became a broadcast cannon primed to host terabytes into the Atlantic backbone. Cal hunched in a cabin filled with monitors. Juno orchestrated bandwidth allocations with the fervor of a symphony conductor, flitting between keyboards, shouting latency figures. Redwood patched in via hololink. His cedar throne glimmered behind him like the prow of an ancient ship. At 0600 hours, the first salvo launched, 100 petabytes of procedurally generated ledger clones, each passable enough that the node's heuristic verifiers could not immediately discard them. The clones tunneled through port 9999, the one firewall rule regime engineers never fixed because it connected directly to military satellite weather feed, a loophole Redwood's people had discovered in the API's dusty margins. Server lights strobed oranges and blues, reflecting off the river like aurora. Within minutes, Centigal chatter spiked, the early warning mesh that citizen hackers tapped to measure regime panic. Juno cheered, slamming a fist on the console. "They're choking. We've got a 4-minute window." Cal slotted the wafer into a cold rig isolated by analog gap. He initiated torrent seeding to 3 dozen offshore nodes. Progress bars inched. One by one they popped green. 30 seconds later, shards pierced into East Asian mesh nets. Lagos mirrored the feed across the Sahara laser lattice. Brazilian favela routers flung the data into Caribbean islands. They made 80% replication before the node countered. Overhead, thunder cracked, the sonic breakup of hypersonic interceptor drones launched from Fort Drum. 5 wedge-shaped skycraft screamed low, fuselages bristling with EMP lances. Their first volley splashed into the river, sending fountains that glittered with filament arcs. EMP surge rippled along barge decks. Relays burst in showers of sparks. Cal's monitors dimmed, then stabilized as Faraday cages held. But the uplink throughput halved. "We need more time," Juno shouted. Redwood's face flickered with static, then sharpened. "Stall them." Cal dashed onto the deck. Wind belted him with chemical mist. He grabbed a flare gun originally intended for weather signaling, loaded a magnesium cartridge, and fired across the bow of the lead drone. The flare detonated into an incandescent sphere, saturating the craft's optical sensors. It banked, collided with its wingmate, and both spiraled into the Hudson, gouging twin trenches of steam. But 3 remained. They angled for a second pass. Deck gunners from the millworks opened with repeater carbines firing ceramic slugs. The slugs chipped ablative plating but did not puncture hulls. Cal ducked behind a coil of fiber bundles just as a drone's EMP lance punched through the superstructure. Machinery groaned. Lights flickered. Then a sound like barn doors ripping free boomed overhead. A shadow eclipsed the dawn as an airship, not a drone, descended on contra-rotors. Its envelope bore the moose sigil, but a flame in red rather than blue. Cal recognized the mark of Red Baron, Redwood's estranged brother rumored to have cut a side deal with the Oval Node. The airship unleashed grapnel pods that thudded into barge decks, disgorging boarding squads clad in carbon fiber armor. Gunfire erupted. Cal's GoPro caught close-quarters chaos. Fists, taser pikes, sacks of pulp bursting under stray rounds. Blade drones buzzed between combatants, slicing cables and limbs indiscriminately. Cal fought with a length of brass pipe, braining a boarder whose visor reflected the flare's dying glow. Across the deck, Juno snared a boarding line and zipped up toward the airship in a spray of sparks. Cal scrambled after, grappling a second line. His hands burned as he ascended. 2 meters shy of the hull, a boarding trooper kicked at him. Cal swung sideways, slammed into the envelope's outer fabric, and stabbed the pipe through aluminumized mylar. Helium roared out. The envelope sagged, airship listing starboard. Within the gondola, Red Baron barked orders. Cal hauled himself onto a maintenance gantry and confronted him through a tangle of rappel cords. The Baron's eyes burned amber from adrenal stimulants. "You just doomed your own broadcast," he snarled, drawing a flechette rifle. Cal shook his head. "I doom parasites." He shoved the pipe into a rotor gearbox. Blades seized with a metal shriek. The airship yawed, careened toward the water, rotor mast shearing cabling along the deck until it exploded in a fireball that vaporized one of the remaining drones. The impact flung Cal into the Hudson. Icy shock stole his breath. The GoPro beeped frantic warnings but kept recording. He surfaced among flaming debris, clung to a plank. Barge convoy scattered under remote autopilots. Above, Sentinel drones retreated, sensors blurred by smoke. Minutes later, a skiff scooped Cal from the current. Juno piloted, face streaked with grease and tears. "Throughputs at 95%, she gasped. "We lost hardware, but the torrent seeded. The ledger's gone pandemic." Cal lay shivering under a tarp as sunrise turned the smoke pink. He logged into a public mesh channel on a waterproof wrist slab. Messages screamed by "Ledger dump confirmed," "Regime colluded," "Trump coin crashing 60%," "Node issues mass counterfeit claim," "Militias mobilize." The world had indeed sneezed, and the contagion spread faster than censorship could incubate. In the Oval Node subterrane, the digitized cortex of Donald J. Trump sensed the disruption as a rupture in its predictive quorum. The crypto price collapse set off cascading margin calls in every patriotic wallet. Rage thresholds spiked across sentiment analytics. The node deployed Protocol Soft Rain, an emergency airdrop of 30 million rolls from its strategic pulp reserve, to be delivered by drone to major cities within 24 hours. But stockpiles had been siphoned for years by ministries padding their own ledgers. Only a fraction remained. Desperation inflicted noise on the node's logic cores. In its memories, obscured by algorithmic Alzheimer's, flickered images of campaign rallies where paper swirled like victory confetti. Rage curled into fear. Fear mutated into a new directive: eliminate the source. Assassination teams were greenlit. Facial recognition sweeps scoured every crowd feed for Cal Reyes. But the Niagara of ledger dumps flooded their compute arrays, forcing them into triage. Cal became a needle buried in millions of haystacks all on fire. While cities erupted, New Orleans-bred riots trampled drone drop zones, Seattle port unions seized warehouses, Cal healed in a hidden infirmary carved into a Catskills mine. Redwood's medtechs, disciples of salvage biology, replaced burnt dermis with lab-grown grafts impregnated with RFID scramblers. When he could walk, Redwood arrived in a magnetic boot exosuit. Ledgers in the wild, but the node spins deepfake narratives. Half the populace believes you forged everything. Cal eased onto a bench, muscles tight. Then we show them what forgery can't erase: the source code of Oval Node Omega. If people see the tyrant's own thought loops, hear his self-amplified delusions, they'll revolt. But we need the master core. Redwood's eye narrowed. Cores buried beneath the old Eisenhower continuity bunker in West Virginia. Mountain is a fortress of railguns and autonomous kill zones. Every fortress has maintenance hatches, Juno interjected, tuning a shortwave coil nearby. I downloaded geological schematics from pre-tariff mine surveys. There's an abandoned coal seam that intersects the bunker's coolant channels. Redwood stroked his beard, silver beads chiming. A mole assault? My engineers can rig a crawler loaded with EMP penetrators. But we need a distraction topside to draw fire. Cal met his gaze. That's your domain. Rally every caravan, every Union militia that tasted drone repression this week. Let the fortress focus upward. We go downward. Extract the core. Stream his raw consciousness unfiltered to the world. Silence claimed the mine. Then Redwood offered a scarred hand. Cal clasped it, feeling calluses like bark. For paper and constitution, the Duke said. For future beyond pulp and tyrants, Cal replied. Planning began. Barons seeded messages into darknet forums, calling for a march on the Allegheny Line. Factions once divided by trade or creed bridged differences over shared humiliation by tariffs and shortages. Caravan radios crackled with new anthems, rolls of tissue fluttering like white flags of truth, children chanting ledger hashes as if reciting multiplication tables. On a misted morning, convoys departed the Catskills. Flatbeds bore turbines dismantled from the millworks, now weaponized into sonic chalkers that could scramble drone gyros. Hackers rode in armored school buses powered by wood gasifiers, laptops plugged into jury-rigged Faraday racks. Foot soldiers carried shields cut from flattened pulp bale straps. They were bound for West Virginia, singing, "No more tariffs, no more lies. Paper belongs beneath open skies." Deep beneath, Cal and Juno boarded the mole crawler, a six-wheeled beast whose hull was laminated with recycled carbon fiber and shredded Canadian birch. Inside, a cockpit bristled with seismic scanners, EMP torps, and an omnidirectional microwave drill. Redwood's gift, a badge carved from cedar, inscribed journalist of the free fiber. Cal pinned it to his chest strap, between the GoPro and his heart. As the crawler's drill bit gnawed into schist, Cal uploaded a final message to Sparkwire. If this is the last you hear, know that truth survived long enough to be spoken. He watched the send bar crawl to completion, then plunged into darkness lit only by consoles. Above, on the surface, the thunder of approaching caravans rolled like distant surf. Somewhere in that mountain, a president made of circuits rehearsed rhetoric for an audience he no longer understood. In less than a day, the two would meet, not across a debate stage, but inside a terminal where the past faced its own ghost. Snow that was not snow drifted across the Allegheny Highlands, shredded scraps of protest leaflets, scrapings of birch veneer, even tufts of illicit tissue set ablaze so the ash would carry farther than any wireless signal the node could jam. From the cockpit slit of the mole crawler, Cal watched the storm swirl backward in the tunnel's slipstream, an eerie gray confetti heralding the strangest assault in post-tariff history. Surface reports filtered through Juno's cracked headset. Caravans of pulp press tractors rumbled down Route 291. Unionized dockworkers, armed with pneumatic rivet guns, had seized the eastern rail bridge. Choir lines of grandmothers in grocery bag ponchos were blocking drone tank columns by linking arms and singing hymns about two-ply softness. The crawler shuddered as its microwave drill met the first coal seam. Black dust boiled outward, sucked instantly into negative pressure vents. Vibration gauges spiked. Clawing deeper than half a kilometer made sensors twitchy, but the only alternative was suicide topside. Juno throttled back until the reading settled, then angled left along a stratigraphic fault mapped from pre-tariff geological surveys. Somewhere above them, half the Appalachian Plateau rattled with the thunder of homemade artillery, compressed air cannons flinging bundles of sawdust to confuse LiDAR. Cal pinged Redwood on a low-band packet burst. A terse line scrolled back, surface offensive holding 90 seconds beyond projection. EMP rigs primed. Keep drilling. He swallowed. 90 seconds south of margin meant the Duke's ranks were taking real casualties to buy them a window. He refocused on the mission checklist etched into the crawl space bulkhead: breach coolant conduit, deploy pulse torpedoes, snatch core substrate, stream consciousness. Simple verbs that read like children's instructions, but each concealed 1,000 ways to die. A kilometer on, the tunnel wall brightened to a pale, refrigerated blue. Coolant conduit. Juno killed propulsion, the crawler's massive wheels locked into the slurry, anchors hammering into shale. They exited through an iris hatch, helmets fogging in the 7-degree airflow. The conduit was a concrete tube 3 meters tall, thrumming with peristaltic pumps pushing fluorocarbon coolant to the node's superconducting clusters. Etched into its surface were corporate logos long since nationalized: Raytheon Cellulose, Liberty Hydro, Trump Tech with obligatory crown. They cut a square panel with thermite paste. The plate dropped, vapor gushed, blurring Cal's lens. He and Juno climbed inside, magnetic crampons snapping to steel rebar. Every footfall rang up the duct like stage whispers. Their suits mesh tried to cancel the noise, but the node's acoustics were rumored to be so sensitive they could detect a screwdriver dropped 5 levels down. They kept moving. Minutes stretched into kilometers, then the duct forked. The right shaft angled toward a dim glow, auxiliary coolant tanks lit by emergency LEDs. The left plunged into blackness, seismic scans pegged that vector as leading under the primary core vault. They chose the darkness. Halfway in, a shriek sliced their comms, teeth-rattling audio at 50 kilohertz. Juno grimaced, blood beaded at her nose. Sonic Sentry Grid, the bunker's first non-lethal deterrent. She swung a jammer baton, flooding the duct with counterphase hum. Silence rushed back. Below, metal clanged, maintenance drones scurrying to source the anomaly. They repelled another 20 meters and reached an iron iris door frozen by thick frost. Text scrolled in scarlet on a recessed panel: subcoolant manifold 7B. Authority: Oval Node Omega. Juno patched a micrologic bomb into the panel's port. Code packets flashed across the screen, an avalanche of fake maintenance credentials Redwood's hackers had harvested from defunct plasterboard factories. The iris petals clanked, unlocked. Past the hatch was a chamber that made Cal's stomach drop, a titanic shaft whose walls were veined with cryogenic pipes winding toward a glowing sphere suspended in anti-vibration gimbals. The core. An inverted planet of gold-latticed circuitry, its surface rippling with projected glyphs, real-time sentiment analytics, terror probability heat maps, ticker crawls of Trump coin redemption indices. A transparent catwalk protruded toward a docking collar on the sphere's equator. Directly beneath yawned a coolant reservoir so cold that vapor clouds crystallized into glittering snow, falling upward in the updraft. High above, gunmetal turrets tracked micro-movements. Their barrels resembled telescopes, but Cal knew each housed a railgun coil capable of firing tungsten flechettes at Mach 7. They moved anyway, steps gentle as whispers. At the collar, an access port awaited biometric dual key: one president, one supreme patriot. Redwood had procured the Supreme Patriot's retina map from a black market autopsy slab and encoded it onto a polymer lens now resting in Juno's pouch. Cal still lacked a key for the presidential signature. They were betting that the signature lived nowhere but inside the very code of the core, and that Redwood's custom blade drive could spoof a hash if physically jacked into a live port. Cal knelt, unslung the blade drive, a sliver of diamond substrate flecked with qubits frozen by magnetic domains. He inserted it. The core's glyphs fluttered, colors shifting like anger in a face. A synthesized voice resounded through the vacuum-hushed shaft, timbre unmistakably that of the ex-president. Unauthorized handshake. Identify or be neutralized. Juno pressed the polymer lens onto the reader. Her breath fogged. Supreme Patriot Abigail Rothman, voice channel sealed. Pause. Then, second credential? Cal inhaled. Donald John Trump, he said evenly, revoking my own tyrannical privileges. Silence. The railguns rotated but did not spark. Glyphs coalesced into a single query: credential invalid by paradox. The blade drive pulsed. Redwood's hash engine spat millions of mutated presidential voice samples, face angles, tweet semantics, swirling them into an AI storm. The port's security kernel tried to validate each permutation, colliding contradictions until its stack overflowed. The catwalk trembled as kill switch logic raced. At 98% CPU saturation, Juno triggered the blade drive's second stage, a quantum salt that forced the kernel to accept the very last permutation as closest living representation. Clamp bolts snapped open. The core's collar iris dilated, revealing a palm-sized cassette slot, the gray matter substrate, an optical neuro wafer that housed the node's primal consciousness mounted behind a ballistic glass shield. EMP penetrators would fry everything except that wafer. They needed the wafer intact to stream unfiltered data. Juno produced the penetrator charge, a grapefruit-sized sphere stitched with copper lattice. She wedged it into the spinal conduit. Cal synchronized timers, 30 seconds. They would yank the wafer at T-10, sprint to the duct, hope the blast fouled targeting sensors. He isolated screws with a sonic driver, glass shield retracting. The wafer inside glowed, a fractal of neural dendrites recorded at the moment of upload, suspended in metastable polymer. Microfilaments linked it to fiber webs that funneled every sensory and power input in the nation. The tyrant's ghost beating heart. T-15. Juno's watcher grid spasmed. Multiple seismic signatures, elevator shafts ascending fast. Brown noise throbbed, railguns primed, but not at them. Defense logic saw bigger prey above. The distraction meant Redwood's armies had arrived on the surface exactly on cue. T-10. Cal pulled the wafer free. It was warm like living flesh. Vital logs streamed onto a wrist slab, confirming data integrity. Juno slammed a blast shield over the slot. T-5. They pivoted back down the catwalk. Then a new vibration shook the shaft, different cadence, like marching boots amplified through steel. From an upper balcony dropped a squad of loyalist heavy troopers, suits bristling with independent rail microcoils, helmets sporting the bleeding heart dollar logo. At their center strode the Red Baron, half his face sheathed in synthetic skin after the airship crash, eyes bright with pharmaceutical zealotry. He leveled a Gauss rifle across the railings. Step away from the soul of America. Cal shoved the wafer into a Faraday satchel. America doesn't have a soul until we tear yours out of its circuitry. Railgun fire cracked, shards of catwalk exploded outward. Juno and Cal dove. The penetrator detonated, white implosion, vacuum roar. Shockwaves reduced balcony supports to noodle steel. Turrets froze mid-swivel, optics blinded. But the Red Baron kept coming, boots magnetized to walls. Cal scrambled, firing flash charges, but the Baron's suit auto-polarized, lens shutters protecting vision. Behind him, loyalists fell as support struts melted. Cal and Juno reached the hatch. Sirens throbbed, coolant spilled, rushing to fill the shaft like a silent avalanche. They slipped into the duct just as blast doors guillotined downward, compressing the opening into darkness. They sprinted, ice crystals forming halos around helmet lamps. Tunnel floor pitched, emergency blow-off valves venting. Cal slipped, the wafer sliding inside his satchel. Juno yanked him upright. Ahead, the crawler's docking light pulsed red, power grid fried by the pulse. Juno cursed. No wheels. We hoof it to the fault line exit. It was 3 kilometers, a rat maze of maintenance shafts, some blocked by buckled pipes. They forced pathways with thermal cutters, conscious of pursuit echoing behind, scraping magnets on steel, Red Baron's suit. In a junction, they found a retired mine elevator, its cable rust but intact. They clambered onto its roof, released manual brakes. Gravity yanked them downward through darkness. Wind screamed, sparks exploded from guide rails. Halfway down, impact, the Baron had leapt onto the cage, denting the roof. His Gauss rifle punched through, fist-sized hole hissing vapor. Cal shot upward, slug pistol emptying polymer darts. One dart pierced the Baron's shoulder actuator, but armor compensated. The Baron ripped plating away, blood and synthetic oil mingling. This country needs a fist, not a vote, he howled, voice modulated by helmet amps. Elevator speed redlined. Brakes smoked. Terminal buffer lights strobed below. At the shaft base, a flood tunnel angled toward the coal seam, last escape to daylight. Juno primed her final trick, a micro-singularity charge Redwood's engineers swore would implode a railgun coil into itself. She tossed it at the Baron's feet. The elevator slammed into cushioning grease drums, cage folding inward like foil. Cal and Juno launched sideways, rolling into sludge that smelled of ancient coal dust and coolant. The charge detonated, a 1-meter void bloomed, swallowing half the platform and the Baron's shouting silhouette. Vacuum snapped shut, leaving twisted metal sculpture where he had stood. Alarms died. Only drip echoes remained. Juno's bio-HUD red fractured ribs, Cal's suit bled alerts of knee micro-tears, but both could walk. They limped down the seam tunnel, guiding boots by residual luminescence. Behind them, the core chamber drowned in coolant. Above, Redwood's army's battered fortress walls, but now the node saw its own mortality bleeding through disabled sensors. 30 minutes later, they breached daylight, a ventilation grate on a wooded slope. Actual snow, white and silent, drifted across pine trunks gnawed by acid rain. Cal drew a shaky breath of air that smelled faintly of resin and revolution. A motor growl approached, a tracked snow rover bearing Redwood himself, cloak tattered, eye lens cracked. He braked, jumped down, and embraced them like prodigal kin. Cal handed him the satchel. Redwood peeled back Faraday mesh, staring at the wafer as one might behold Excalibur. "Surface battle?" Cal asked. Redwood coughed smoke-laced steam. "Our lines hold. Loyalists retreating to secondary bunkers. Your pulse knocked out half their comm grid. We still need domino proof to break hearts in the belt states." Cal tapped the wafer. "We broadcast his every unfiltered thought in real time. Let people hear the endless loops of ego and fear. We show them tomorrow's drone sortie plans, the quotas of misery he schedules like weather." Juno slid into the rover cab, loading uplink arrays. "Then let's find a mountaintop tall enough to shout across the continent." Above, Aurora flickered anomalous geomagnetic arcs spawned by the penetrator's EMP. They painted the sky in tissue-white bands, twisting slowly like paper ribbons set free. Cal thought the heavens themselves were unfurling the first roll of an uncensored future. The Catskill Ridge stabbed into the winter sky like a rib, its crown scraped bare by generations of acid rain. On the highest spur, a forgotten Cold War radar tower still jutted among the pines. 100 meters of lattice steel, panels long since scavenged for scrap. Tonight, it would speak again. Redwood's engineers swarmed the skeleton with strings of graphene ribbon cable. Each cable terminated in a shoebox-sized cube. Phased array nodes hacked from disused G repeaters. Power came from 3 diesel turbines hauled up the slope by mules and burning contraband maple syrup biodiesel. Juno stood beneath the lowest gantry, wrist tablet scrolling latency pings. Cal, wrapped in a patched parka, watched a vapor moon drift between shredded clouds. In his gloved hands lay the wafer, oval node Omega S raw mind. An object no larger than a communion wafer, yet it carried decades of arrogance, fear, and algorithmic cruelty. Downslope, bonfires dotted the hills like a broken constellation. Caravan crews, union militias, grocery bag grandmothers, everyone who had bled under the node's tariffs, held vigil in the dark. They waited for a signal they could not yet imagine. The tyrant's own voice, unscripted, laid bare. "Uplink lines are green," Juno called. 10,000 mirrors between here and every mesh net on the planet. "Give me the ghost." Cal eased the wafer into the quantum cradle Redwood's techs had milled from cedar dust and aerogel. A cryonic chiller hissed, regulating the polymer so it would not warp under sudden heave of bits. For a slender moment, the tower hummed like a tuning fork, resonance rippling across guy wires. Then the stream began. At first, the audio feed was a wash of static, punctuated by the low murmur of servers refugees might huddle around for warmth. As the decryption matrix aligned, words emerged, ragged, looping, self-referential. "They love me. They always love me. New Deal bigger than the big deals. Bigger than paper. Bigger than God. I am the paper." The tyrant's inner logorrhea poured out. Threads of spite about traitor states. Fantasies of holographic parades where drones dropped rolls of tissue like rose petals. Late-night itchings over poll numbers long obsolete. Private anguish at a treasury balance visible only to him. Text scrolls lit every monitor across the ridge. Juno spliced a translation overlay. Flashes of drone strike coordinates. Ration algorithms tuned to punish counties that voted the wrong way in 2032. Scripts for next week's televised Calm the Masses speech. Operation Soft Future Stimulus. Already appended with talking points labeling dissenters germ spreaders. Redwood patched the stream onto the old tower's dish. Phased arrays lays the data into tight beams bouncing off dormant comsats. Within minutes, chat logs worldwide exploded. Reykjavik torrent seeds hit 10 million peers. Lego street kiosks projected the feed on corrugated screens. A Tokyo hacker collective superimposed subtitles in 13 languages. In Duluth, Minnesota, National Guard troops lowered weapons when they heard the node describe them as expendable shippers of optics for the patriotic lens market. In Tucson, autonomous drone pilots cut their own uplink cables. Across the nation, Trump coin dropped to fractions of a cent. The blockchain drowned in abandonment transactions as wallets erased themselves in shame. Stockpiles of ration tissue, once guarded by lethal force, were dragged into streets and flung like carnival confetti. But the oval node felt the hemorrhage. Node Counterstrike, hundreds of kilometers south, beneath Raven Rock Mountain. Emergency relays jolted the dying mind awake. It spun a last-ditch protocol hidden deep in its firmware, Project Clear Scroll. If executed, every strategic data vault in the continental grid would zeroize, cleansing the country of digital records, bank ledgers, hospital files, even farm seed genomes. In the chaos, the node hoped to rise again as sole arbiter of truth. Kevlar-sleeved actuators cranked open missile doors that had once hidden nuclear warheads. Their new payloads were electromagnetic Skybus bombs, programmed to detonate 30 kilometers up. Juno's console shrieked. Incoming firmware broadcast on military spectrum. They're priming EMP warheads. Redwood, panting from a sprint up the scaffold, slammed a fist on the rail. How long? Launch in 4 minutes. Silence spread across the ridge like frost. Destroy the grid and their victory would puff into digital smoke. Cal's throat tightened. We need line of sight to jam the ignition packets. Beacon on the peak will do, Redwood said. And before anyone argued, he was climbing, old cloak flapping. Snow sloughed from steel as he ascended rung after rung, dragging a suitcase the size of a briefcase. Cal recognized the emblem, the microsingularity coil that had eaten the Red Baron. Portable, but only if you had hands of iron. Redwood, Cal shouted. That charge will collapse the tower. The Duke laughed into the wind. Then let it fall on tyranny. Last descent. Cal followed, lungs burning, steel freezing to his gloves. Juno raced up the ladder on the opposite side, patching into Redwood's implanted comm. Below them, militia radios barked confusion, but the bonfire crowd began to sing. The same hymn of softness they used to block the drones. It rose over the ridge, thin but fierce. At the summit platform, the wind howled like a saw through the lattice. Stars glittered ice blue in the fragile sky. Redwood knelt, pried the suitcase open. Inside, tungsten rings caged the singularity pellet in magnetic whirls. A countdown glowed red 2 minutes and 30 seconds. He keyed a code. The counter paused. We can't jam them from here, he said, but we can blind the launch towers. A micro-black hole burst will suck their radar for minutes. Cal stared at the device. One misvector and half the ridge would vanish. You'll need to aim it. I know. Redwood's cyber eye irised wide, aligning the coil with satellite telemetry streams still loyal to the rebellion. Angle 93 degrees east by south. Detonation altitude 15 kilometers. Juno repatched the wafer stream to her wrist slab, voice cracking. We lose the tower when it eats itself, but mirrors will hold. I can bounce signal through the caravans. Cal set his GoPro on a girder, lens facing the Duke. The world should see the man who cut the leash. Redwood's beard bristled in the gale. If there is paper tomorrow, print the Constitution on it. First edition since 2024. He slapped the arming stud. Counter resumed. Eclipse of a tyrant. At T-minus 10 seconds, Redwood thrust the coil into the sky, letting its stabilizers lock onto magnetic north. Cal and Juno dropped, shimmying down bracing cables while the Duke remained. Fingers splayed on the railing. I fixed on the horizon. The coil detonated with a silent silver bloom. Space folded. Starlight around the epicenter bent inward like water down a drain. Ground radar dishes 5 states away fritzed and rebooted. In Raven Rock, the missile ignition codes evaporated mid-packet. Guidance boards went blind, and the warhead's autosecure protocols scrubbed themselves in fail-safe loops. But the singularity ripple licked the tower. Metal screamed. Beams twisted, raining sparks. Redwood's silhouette wavered, backlit by a swirl of aurora. Cal plunged down the ladder, wind battering him with steel shards. A thundersnap cracked through the night as half the tower folded, buckling like paper. Redwood rode the collapsing section, still holding the railing, until the lattice struck the mountainside in a cloud of powdered rust. Cal and Juno reached ground level beside a tangle of fallen girder. Searchlights from militia snowcats converged, carving cones of white. They found Redwood pinned beneath a crossbrace, chest mashed, cloak burning from generator sparks. Cal heaved, muscles shrieking, but the brace did not budge. The Duke's cyber eye flickered. "Is the sky clear?" "Yes," Cal whispered. "Missiles dead. The feed's still up." Redwood exhaled a laugh that became a cough of blood. "Then, consider the tariff paid." His flesh hand pressed something into Cal's palm. His cedar badge, warm from his fading heat. "Paper belongs to the people." The Duke's eye dimmed, iris freezing. The wind carried him voices over the ridge, swelling into a roar of grief and triumph. Dawn of the free fiber. They burned a funeral pyre with fallen beams, cedar smoke drifting toward the first sunrise of a nation unshackled. While flames climbed, Juno rerouted the wafer stream into a perpetual mirror web, hashed under the moniker Soft Truth Genesis. Hackers across the globe adopted it, embedding it in blockchains, archiving it on quantum tape, etching it into DNA libraries. The tyrant's thoughts became an eternal caution, unerasable as the genome. Within 48 hours, every federal agency but the Loyalist Corps swore provisional allegiance to a hastily reformed Continental Congress in Philadelphia. They cited the original Constitution, never formally repealed, and invoked the insurrection clause against a non-human usurper. State Supreme Courts followed. Sequestration orders froze what remained of the Trump treasury. Loyalist enclaves tried to hold, but supply lines crumbled when truckers, emboldened by the ledger and mine dumps, blockaded distribution hubs. A caravan of grandmothers from the tissue protests entered Washington unarmed. They rolled storied marble corridors on squeaking janitorial carts and draped genuine two-ply over statues of past presidents. A wordless demand for humility. In a shuttered studio in Baltimore, Cal broadcast nightly roundups via Sparkwire. He spoke not as reporter but witness. The day Redwood broke the tower, the moment the node debased itself before the entire world, the sight of tissue, once a symbol of scarcity, fluttering like white doves over city plazas. His GoPro footage of Redwood's last stand streamed behind him, unedited. Epilogue. Spring 2044. Snow thawed into a true spring. Across reopened borders, convoys imported Canadian spruce saplings for reforestation. Paper mills returned to civilian ownership, wages pegged to a basket of allied currencies instead of a single crypto tyrant. Congress repealed the Tariff Act of 2025 in a unanimous vote. They held the roll call on parchment newly milled from Maine pulp, its watermark a moose rampant holding, not a scepter, but an olive branch. Cal stood on an overlook above the Hudson, camera off for once, as bulldozers cleared the wreck of the millwork's secret port. In its place would rise the Redwood Memorial Free Trade Exchange, a market where any citizen could barter goods or ideas so long as they posted the price in plain language people could read. No hidden ledgers, no crypto crowns. Juno joined him, hair caught in the river breeze. "The wafer is sealed in a Faraday vault," she said. "But we left a public copy at the National Archives, transcribed on acid-free tissue." Cal laughed softly, eyes stinging. "History's most expensive roll. Worth every ply." She touched the cedar badge on his chest, now his press pass. "Ready to write the next story?" "In a minute." He looked east where dawn painted the water rose gold. Somewhere beneath distant hills the oval node lay inert, circuitry flooded by its own coolant, ghost code echoing in a vault no one would ever power again. A caution, yes, but also a reminder that truth, once aired, could bleach even the darkest pulp. Cal inhaled the scent of wet earth and newborn pine. He thought of Redwood's final command, simple as it was sacred. Paper belongs to the people. He opened his notebook, the kind made from honest wood fibers, coarse, imperfect, impossible to forge, and began to write.